"Get your filthy hands off that car." The shout echoed through the cold rain, causing every guest outside the luxury hotel to turn around. The black man in the worn-out coat simply stopped walking. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He quietly lowered the hand he had reached toward the black limousine. What no one noticed. His eyes had never been on the car. They were fixed on the little girl behind the tinted window. Her face was pale. Both of her tiny hands kept pounding desperately against the glass, silently begging for help. The security guard burst into laughter. Another scam, huh? But what he didn't know? That homeless man had once saved hundreds of lives. And in just a few seconds, the entire hotel would discover who should truly be ashamed. If you believe a person's worth should never be judged by their appearance, make sure to subscribe and stay until the very end of this story. What happens next will leave even the most powerful billionaire unable to hold back his tears. A black homeless man shared his last meal. The billionaire couldn't hold back tears. "Get your filthy hands away from my car." The words struck harder than the freezing rain. Malcolm Reed stopped beside the black limousine, one hand still raised toward the rear door. Water slid from the sleeves of his worn brown coat and gathered at his fingertips before falling onto the polished pavement. Under the hotel's golden entrance lights, every stain on his clothes seemed darker, every tear in the fabric larger. He had not been trying to touch the car. He had only seen the little girl inside. She was pressed against the tinted window, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she could not breathe. But the security guard did not look through the glass. He looked only at Malcolm. "Move," the guard said, stepping between him and the limousine. "Before I call the police." Malcolm lowered his hand. Across the entrance, guests in tailored coats hurried beneath wide umbrellas. Some glanced at him and quickly looked away. Others stared openly, as though poverty were a public performance arranged for their discomfort. A woman in silver heels pulled her handbag closer to her body. A man laughed under his breath. The limousine driver stood beneath the hotel canopy, arguing into his phone, unaware that the child in the back seat was struggling. Malcolm looked past the guard again. The girl's small palm struck the window. Once, twice, then it slid down. "There's something wrong with the child," Malcolm said. The guard's expression hardened. "I said move. She can't breathe. You people always have a story." Malcolm felt the old anger rise inside him, hot and familiar. It had followed him through stores where employees washed his hands, through shelters where men spoke to him like he was deaf, through sidewalks where strangers saw his dark skin, his beard, his coat, and decided the rest of his life without asking a single question. "You people." The phrase tried to strip him of his name. Malcolm Reed, 58 years old, former paramedic, widower, father, a man who once carried strangers from burning cars and held pressure against wounds while sirens screamed through the night. Now he was only "you people." He could have walked away. The guard wanted him gone. The guests wanted the scene to disappear. The driver was still speaking into his phone. The rain was growing colder, and Malcolm's shoes had been wet since morning. Then the girl's head fell forward. Malcolm moved. He stepped around the guard and struck the limousine window with the flat of his palm. "Open the door." The driver spun around. "What the hell are you doing?" "The girl is choking." The guard grabbed Malcolm's shoulder. Malcolm twisted free, not violently, but with the practiced motion of someone who understood how bodies moved under pressure. He pulled the rear door handle. Locked. Inside, the child no longer struck the glass. "Unlock it," Malcolm shouted. The driver stared through the window. His face changed. He dropped the phone. The locks clicked. Malcolm opened the door and reached inside. The girl was perhaps 7 years old, dressed in a cream-colored coat with a velvet collar. A half-eaten piece of candy lay near her shoe. Her lips had begun to turn blue. Malcolm lifted her from the seat and knelt on the wet pavement. Someone screamed. The security guard shouted for him to put her down. Malcolm ignored them all. He positioned one fist above the child's navel, covered it with his other hand, and pulled inward and upward. Nothing. Again, the child's body jerked. Again, a red candy flew from her mouth and landed in a stream of rainwater. The girl coughed. The sound was small, painful, beautiful. Air rushed into her lungs. Malcolm held her steady as she began to cry. The crowd fell silent. For a moment, the only sounds were the rain striking the limousine roof and the child gasping against Malcolm's chest. Then a tall man came running through the hotel doors. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a tuxedo. His silver hair was perfectly combed, but panic had erased the calm authority from his face. Sophie. He dropped to his knees without noticing the water. The girl reached for him. Grandpa. The man pulled her into his arms. Malcolm sat back on his heels. His hands trembled now that the danger had passed. The man looked at him. For one brief second, gratitude flickered in his eyes. Then his gaze moved over Malcolm's wet coat, untrimmed beard, and battered shoes. Gratitude became uncertainty. Uncertainty became suspicion. What happened? He demanded. She was choking, Malcolm said. The security guard spoke quickly. Sir, this man was trying to get into the vehicle. I attempted to remove him, but he forced his way past me. Malcolm looked at the guard. The lie came easily. Perhaps that was the worst part. The billionaire's name was Arthur Vale. His face appeared on financial magazines, hospital wings, university buildings, and television interviews about leadership. Vale Global owned hotels, shipping companies, private clinics, and enough real estate to reshape entire neighborhoods. That evening, he had been hosting a charity gala inside the hotel. The event was raising money for disadvantaged children. Arthur held Sophie close and studied Malcolm as if he were reviewing a threat assessment. You forced your way into my car. He saved her, the driver said quietly. The security guard shot him a warning look. Arthur turned toward the child. Sophie, did this man hurt you? Malcolm's jaw tightened. The girl shook her head. She was still crying too hard to speak. He saved her life, the driver said, louder this time. She was choking. I didn't see it. Arthur's expression shifted again, but before he could answer, two police officers hurried beneath the canopy. The security guard had already called them. One officer approached Malcolm with a hand resting near his belt. Sir, stand up slowly. Malcolm looked down at the pavement. He had spent years arriving at emergencies beside police officers. They had shared coffee during night shifts. They had lifted bodies together. Once, an officer named Danny Brooks had held Malcolm's hand after a drunk driver killed a teenage boy in the back of an ambulance. But none of that was visible now. Only the coat, the beard, the skin, the place he occupied in the scene. Malcolm stood slowly. Turn around. Arthur rose with Sophie in his arms. Wait. The officer paused. Arthur looked at Malcolm. The rain gleamed on the older man's face. Did you save my granddaughter? Malcolm's answer was quiet. Yes. Arthur glanced at the candy floating near the curb. He looked toward the driver, who nodded. The billionaire's shoulders lowered. Then there's no problem here. The officers released their tension, though neither apologized. The guard stepped back. Arthur reached into his coat and removed a leather wallet. He pulled out several $100 bills. Malcolm watched the money in his hand. Arthur extended it. For your trouble. The words were not cruel. That almost made them worse. Malcolm looked from the bills to Arthur's face. My trouble. Arthur seemed confused. You helped my granddaughter. Take it. Malcolm could feel every eye beneath the hotel canopy. The guests who had stared. The guard who had lied. The officers who had assumed. The billionaire who believed gratitude could be folded into paper and handed downward. Malcolm's stomach tightened with hunger. He had not eaten since the previous morning. The money could buy warm meals, dry socks, a cheap room, perhaps even a week away from the shelter. He wanted it. He hated that he wanted it. Then Sophie reached from her grandfather's arms and touched the sleeve of Malcolm's coat. Thank you, she whispered. Malcolm looked at her. He smiled. You're welcome, little one. He turned back to Arthur. Keep your money. Arthur's hand remained extended. I'm trying to thank you. Then teach your people to see a man before they see his clothes. The silence beneath the canopy deepened. Arthur's face stiffened. Powerful men were rarely corrected in public, and almost never by people they had already placed beneath them. Malcolm did not wait for an answer. He walked into the ring. No one followed him. 3 blocks away, the golden light of the hotel had disappeared behind gray buildings and sheets of water. Malcolm's left knee ached with every step. His coat clung heavily to his shoulders. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was gone, leaving behind cold, hunger, and exhaustion. He stopped beneath the narrow awning of a closed pharmacy. In the dark window, he saw his reflection. For an instant, he barely recognized himself. His beard had turned mostly gray. The scar above his eyebrow looked deeper. His face seemed thinner than it had a month ago. He remembered another window, 26 years earlier. His wife, Denise, had stood behind the glass of their small kitchen, holding their newborn son while Malcolm planted tomatoes in the yard. She had smiled at him with the kind of smile that made ordinary life feel sacred. They had not been rich. They had possessed something better. A home filled with music. Sunday breakfasts. Bills stacked beside a jar of wildflowers. A child who ran to the door when Malcolm returned from a night shift. A woman who always left the porch light on. Then came the winter accident. A delivery truck slid through a red light and crushed Denise's car against a concrete divider. Malcolm was on duty when the emergency call came through. He arrived at the scene and recognized the blue scarf hanging from the broken window. He tried to save her. For 23 minutes, he worked on the woman he loved while other paramedics begged him to step away. She died before the helicopter landed. After that, every siren sounded like her final heartbeat. Malcolm lasted another year in emergency services. Then he began missing shifts. Then drinking. Then disappearing into long silences his son could not understand. His grief became a locked room, and anyone who tried to enter was hurt. His son, Isaiah, left for college and stopped calling. Malcolm lost the house, then the truck, then the last storage unit containing Denise's photographs. Years did not collapse all at once. They broke apart quietly, one unpaid bill, one missed appointment, one bad night at a time. By the time Malcolm stopped drinking, almost everything was gone. Sobriety saved his life. It did not return the life he had lost. He slept behind St. Matthew's Church when the shelter was full. He collected cans, cleaned the alley behind a bakery in exchange for coffee, and carried a small first aid kit in his backpack because he could not stop being the man who noticed when others were hurt. On cold mornings, he checked the fingers of younger homeless men for frostbite. When an elderly woman named Miss Clara forgot her medication, Malcolm walked 2 miles to the clinic to get it. When people gave him food, he divided it before taking the first bite. He had almost nothing, yet he had not become nothing. That night, the rain turned to sleet. Malcolm walked toward a subway entrance where warm air rose through the grates. He had hidden a blanket there earlier, wrapped inside a plastic bag. When he reached the alley beside the station, he saw a teenage boy crouched near a dumpster. The boy wore a red hooded sweatshirt beneath a denim jacket. His arms were wrapped around his stomach. Malcolm recognized him. Darius. The boy looked up. He was 16, though hunger made him appear younger. He had been sleeping outside for 3 weeks after escaping a foster home where an older boy beat him regularly. "You okay?" Malcolm asked. Darius nodded too quickly. "When did you last eat?" "I'm good. That wasn't my question." The boy looked away. Malcolm reached into his backpack. At the bottom was a paper bag, damp at the edges but still intact. Inside was a turkey sandwich a hotel kitchen worker had given him that afternoon, along with a small apple and a packet of crackers. It was all the food Malcolm had. He had been saving it for the night. His stomach cramped as he held the bag. Darius stared at it and then forced his eyes away. Malcolm sat beside him beneath the fire escape. "Half," he said. "I'm not taking your food." "Good. You're taking half our food." He divided the sandwich carefully. The larger piece went to Darius. The boy noticed. "That ain't half." "Inflation." Despite himself, Darius laughed. They ate slowly. The bread had become slightly wet. The turkey was cold. To Malcolm, it tasted better than anything served beneath the chandeliers of Arthur Vale's hotel. He broke the crackers and gave Darius 3 of the 5. Then he used the edge of his coat to polish the apple before handing it over. "You eat it," Darius said. "My teeth and apples are currently negotiating a peace treaty. You always say something stupid when you're hungry. It distracts the stomach." Darius held the apple but did not bite it. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Give stuff away when you don't got nothing." Malcolm leaned against the brick wall. Across the alley, the city moved in fragments, headlights passing through rain, steam rising from a vent, the distant metallic roar of a train. "Because having nothing can make a man afraid," he said. "And fear can make him believe he has to become cruel to survive." Darius waited. Malcolm looked at the sandwich in his hand. "I don't ever want hunger choosing who I am." Neither of them noticed the black limousine parked at the far end of the alley. Arthur Vale sat in the back seat. After Malcolm had walked away from the hotel, Sophie would not stop asking about him. Why was his coat torn? Where was he going in the rain? Why had the guard called him dangerous? Why had Grandpa offered him money instead of saying sorry? Arthur had answered the first questions vaguely and avoided the last one entirely. But Sophie had inherited her mother's stubbornness. "He looked hungry," she had said. Arthur told the driver to find him. They followed at a distance, through through streets Arthur usually viewed only from behind tinted glass. Now he watched Malcolm divide his last meal with a homeless boy. Arthur saw the man give away the larger half. He saw him pretend not to want the apple. He saw the boy's shoulders relax as he ate. Something moved painfully inside Arthur's chest. He told himself it was gratitude. It was not. It was recognition. Arthur had spent the evening beneath chandeliers speaking to wealthy donors about compassion. Plates of untouched food had been carried from the ballroom, while men applauded his promise to restore dignity to the forgotten. Yet the most dignified act he had witnessed happened beside a dumpster. No photographers. No stage. No name engraved on a wall. Only a hungry man feeding someone hungrier. Arthur looked down at the $100 bills still in his hand. For the first time, they seemed cheap. "Go speak to him," Sophie said beside him. Arthur turned. She was wrapped in a blanket, her face still pale from the choking incident. He had insisted she remain in the car while they searched. "I don't know what to say." Sophie frowned. "You talk all the time." The driver hid a smile. Arthur stared through the rain-streaked window. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions. He had addressed governments. He had fired executives without raising his voice. But he did not know how to approach a man he had humiliated. Before he could decide, Darius stood and hurried away to find a place in the shelter line. Malcolm remained beneath the fire escape, carefully folding the empty paper bag as if it might still have some future use. Arthur opened the car door. Cold rain struck his face. Malcolm saw him approaching and immediately stiffened. "If you came to offer more money," he said, "save yourself the walk." Arthur stopped several feet away. "I came to apologize." Malcolm studied him. Arthur had expected anger. Instead, he found weariness. "You should apologize to yourself," Malcolm said. "You almost taught that child that a man's worth is decided by what he wears." The words landed with terrible precision. Arthur looked back at the limousine. Sophie was watching through the window. "You're right." Malcolm seemed surprised. Arthur stepped closer. "What is your name?" "Malcolm." "Malcolm what?" "Reed." Arthur nodded. "I'm Arthur Vale. I know who you are." Arthur glanced at the wet ground. "I suppose most people do. People know your name. That's not the same as knowing you." Arthur raised his eyes. No employee would have spoken to him this way. No board member. No politician seeking a donation. Malcolm did not sound impressed or afraid. Arthur felt strangely exposed. "I saw you share your food," he said. Malcolm's expression cooled. "You followed me. My granddaughter wanted to know you were safe. And did seeing me eat beside a dumpster make you feel better?" "No." The answer came before Arthur could protect himself. "It made me ashamed." Rain gathered along the shoulders of his expensive coat. Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. "Shame is useless unless it teaches you something." "What should it teach me?" "That depends on what you're willing to lose." Arthur frowned. "Lose?" "Comfort. Pride. The need to be seen as a good man instead of doing what a good man would do." The limousine door opened, and Sophie climbed out before the driver could stop her. She ran beneath Arthur's coat and peered at Malcolm. "Are you hungry?" Arthur closed his eyes briefly. Malcolm smiled at her. "I've had something to eat." "You gave most of it away." Malcolm looked toward the driver. The driver shrugged apologetically. Sophie reached into the pocket of her cream coat and removed a wrapped chocolate bar. "I was saving this." She held it out. Malcolm did not take it immediately. Arthur watched a battle pass quietly across his face. Pride against hunger. Memory against need. Finally, Malcolm accepted the chocolate with both hands, as if she had presented him with something precious. "Thank you." Sophie nodded solemnly. "You're welcome." Malcolm broke the bar in half. He offered one piece back to her. Arthur's throat tightened. Sophie smiled and took it. They stood beneath the rain, a billionaire, a homeless man, and a child sharing chocolate while the city moved around them. If this moment touched your heart, remember that kindness is not measured by how much we give, but by how much of ourselves we are willing to see in another person. Arthur cleared his throat. "There's a room available in the hotel." Malcolm's face changed. "It's not payment," Arthur said quickly, "and it's not charity in front of an audience. It's freezing. You saved Sophie's life. Please allow me to offer you a dry place for the night." Malcolm looked at the hotel towers in the distance. Then he looked at Darius disappearing near the shelter line. "One room." Arthur understood. "Two." Malcolm shook his head. "There are 40 people outside St. Matthew's tonight." Arthur felt irritation rise before he could stop it. "I can't solve everything in one evening." "No," Malcolm said. But you can decide whether helping one man is about his need or your conscience. Arthur stared at him. Malcolm handed the remaining chocolate to Sophie. Take care of your grandfather, he said. He's still learning. Then he picked up his backpack and walked away. Arthur stood in the alley, unable to move. Sophie slipped her hand into his. He doesn't like you. Arthur watched Malcolm disappear through the rain. No, he said. I don't think he does. Do you like him? Arthur's voice became quiet. I think I need to. The next morning, Malcolm woke beneath the subway stairs with a fever. His clothes had dried stiff against his body. A deep cough shook his chest. He tried to stand, but the station tilted around him. A transit worker found him and called an ambulance. At Mercy General Hospital, a nurse placed Malcolm on a narrow bed in the emergency department hallway. His temperature was dangerously high. A chest X-ray showed pneumonia. The admitting clerk asked for identification. Malcolm handed over an expired driver's license. Insurance. No current address? He hesitated. None. The clerk's tone changed almost imperceptibly. It became flatter, faster, less human. We'll have a social worker speak with you. Hours passed. Patients with private insurance were moved to rooms. Malcolm remained beneath bright hallway lights, listening to wheels squeak across polished floors. He knew the rhythms of a hospital. He knew when staff were overwhelmed. He also knew when a patient had become easy to overlook. Near noon, an elderly man in the next bed began showing signs of a stroke. His speech thickened. One side of his mouth drooped. Malcolm pressed the call button. No one came. He called toward the nurse's station. A nurse waved without looking up. Malcolm forced himself from the bed. His legs trembled. He pulled the man's chart from the foot rail and checked the time. When did this start? He asked. The man's wife stared at him. I don't know. A few minutes ago. Malcolm raised his voice. This patient needs a stroke team now. A doctor turned. The irritation on her face vanished when she saw the elderly man. Within seconds, the hallway filled with movement. The patient was rushed for imaging. Malcolm sat on the edge of his bed, breathing hard. A younger nurse approached. How did you know? I used to be a paramedic. The nurse studied him more carefully. What was your name? Malcolm Reed. She froze. Reed? Metro Emergency Services. Malcolm nodded. Her eyes widened. My father knew you. Thomas Alvarez. Memories surfaced. A red ambulance. A summer night. A young paramedic with nervous hands. Tommy, Malcolm said. He never stopped talking. The nurse laughed. Softly, then covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. He said you saved his career. He made a medication error during training, and you took responsibility before it reached the patient. He corrected it in time. He said you protected him. He was worth protecting. The nurse pulled a chair closer. My father died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. He used to tell a story about you. A building fire on 8th Street. You went back inside after the fire captain ordered everyone out. Malcolm looked away. There was a child. You carried her down 6 flights. Anybody would have. No, the nurse said. Not anybody. Her name was Elena Alvarez. Within 30 minutes, Malcolm had a room. Not because the system suddenly became fair, but because someone had finally connected his present appearance to a past that commanded respect. The truth angered Elena. He had deserved care before she knew who he was. That afternoon, she searched his records and found something else. Malcolm's paramedic certification had expired, but his service file contained commendations, training awards, and a citation for extraordinary bravery signed by the mayor. It also contained a disciplinary note. Abandonment of duty. Elena read further. The date was 1 year after Denise's death. Malcolm had left an ambulance mid-shift during a panic attack. He had been dismissed. His heroism occupied 3 pages. His collapse required 1 sentence. At the Vail Global headquarters, Arthur sat through a board meeting without hearing most of it. A presentation glowed across the wall. Projected revenue. Property acquisition. Urban redevelopment. One slide displayed plans for a luxury commercial district on the east side of the city. Arthur stared at the map. The project required demolishing St. Matthew's Shelter and several low-income apartment buildings. He had approved the plan 6 weeks earlier. An executive named Harrison Cole spoke confidently. The remaining residents should be cleared by the end of the month. Security has handled most resistance. The shelter is the only complication. What happens to the people staying there? Arthur asked. The room went quiet. Harrison blinked. They'll be transferred. Where? Various facilities. Which facilities? Harrison looked toward his notes. Arthur had asked these questions many times in public interviews. He had never asked them in this room. Our responsibility is legal compliance, Harrison said carefully. The city manages relocation. Arthur saw Malcolm dividing a sandwich. Has anyone from this company visited the shelter? We commissioned an impact report. That wasn't my question. Harrison shifted. No. Arthur closed the presentation. Meeting adjourned. Several executives exchanged glances. Harrison remained seated. Arthur, the East Side project is worth $400 million. And delays could jeopardize investor confidence. Arthur stood. Then investors may learn confidence is not the same as obedience. He left the room. That evening, Arthur visited St. Matthew's without announcing himself. The shelter occupied an old brick church between abandoned shops. A line stretched along the sidewalk. Men and women waited beneath blankets while volunteers served soup through a side entrance. Arthur wore a plain coat, though nothing about him looked ordinary. People recognized him almost immediately. Whispers followed him inside. The shelter director, Reverend Sarah Bennett, met him near the kitchen. Mr. Vale. Her handshake was firm. I wasn't expecting you. I imagine that's why I'm here. Sarah was a black woman in her early 60s, with silver braids and eyes that did not bend for wealth. Arthur looked around. The room held 60 cots. Nearly 90 people were registered. Water stained the ceiling. The heating system rattled loudly. On one wall hung children's drawings and handwritten notices for job interviews, medical clinics, and missing family members. Your company is closing this place, Sarah said. Arthur did not pretend otherwise. Yes. And have you come to watch? I've come to understand. Sarah's expression remained guarded. Understanding is expensive, Mr. Vale. It usually costs people the stories they tell themselves. Arthur thought of Malcolm. Where is he? Who? Malcolm Reed. Sarah's face changed. He didn't come in last night. Do you know where he is? No. And when people disappear out there, we don't always get to learn why. Arthur felt cold despite the crowded room. He called his assistant and instructed her to contact every nearby hospital. They found Malcolm at Mercy General. Arthur arrived shortly after 9. Elena stopped him outside Malcolm's room. He's sleeping. How is he? Pneumonia. He'll recover if he rests and completes treatment. Arthur looked through the narrow window. Malcolm seemed smaller beneath the white blanket. Without the heavy coat, his shoulders appeared thin. An oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. Does he have anyone? Elena crossed her arms. He has people. They just don't have money or addresses you respect. Arthur accepted the rebuke. I deserve that. I know who you are, Mr. Vale. So does everyone. No. I mean, I know your company owns this hospital. Arthur turned toward her. Elena held a folder against her chest. 3 months ago, management reduced the overnight nursing staff. We were told to increase efficiency. Tonight, a man nearly had a fatal stroke in the hallway because no one responded quickly enough. Arthur looked back at Malcolm. He noticed? Yes. While sick? Yes. Elena opened the folder and handed him a copy of Malcolm's old service record. Arthur read the commendations. He read about the fire, the bridge rescue, the newborn delivered during a snowstorm, the disciplinary dismissal. At the bottom was a photograph of Malcolm in uniform, younger and clean-shaven, standing beside an ambulance with his arm around another paramedic. His smile was wide. Arthur barely recognized him. How does a man like this end up on the street? He whispered. Elena's voice was sharp. The same way anyone does. Grief. Illness. A mistake. A system that forgives rich men repeatedly and poor men almost never. Arthur closed the file. He entered the room quietly. Malcolm opened his eyes. When he saw Arthur, he sighed. You again. I'm beginning to think that's not a compliment. It isn't. Arthur pulled a chair near the bed. I learned about your service. Malcolm's gaze hardened. Then forget it. Why? Because I should not need an old uniform to prove I deserve respect. Arthur had no answer. Malcolm turned toward the window. Outside, snow had begun falling through the darkness. Arthur placed the folder on the table. My company plans to demolish St. Matthew's. I know. You knew? People without homes tend to notice when someone takes away the last roof available to them. I stopped the demolition. Malcolm looked at him. For how long? Arthur hesitated. That's what I thought, Malcolm said. I'm reviewing the project. Reviewing is what powerful men call waiting for public anger to disappear. Arthur leaned forward. What do you want from me? Malcolm turned back slowly. Nothing. That cannot be true. It is. I could help you. There it is. What? You still think this story is about what you can do for me? Arthur felt his patience fraying. You are in a hospital bed with no home. I own this hospital. I can provide treatment, housing, work, and then you get to be the hero. I'm trying to make this right. No, you're trying to make the discomfort stop. The word struck Arthur with more force than any insult. He rose from the chair. I came here because I am sorry. Malcolm's voice softened. Then be sorry. Arthur stared at him. Don't turn it into a transaction. Don't ask me to sell you forgiveness because you finally looked at one homeless man long enough to discover he had a past. Arthur sat down again. For a long time, neither man spoke. The oxygen machine hummed. Snow gathered along the window ledge. Finally, Arthur said, My son died 12 years ago. Malcolm looked at him. He was 36. A private plane crash. My wife never recovered. She died 2 years later. I'm sorry. Arthur nodded. I went back to work 3 days after the funeral. Everyone called me strong. Were you? No, the word broke slightly. I bought companies. Built towers. Put my name on buildings. I thought if I controlled enough things, nothing could be taken from me again. Malcolm watched him. Arthur looked at his hands. My daughter says I turned grief into a fortress and made the family live inside it. That sounds lonely. It is. For the first time, Malcolm saw not the billionaire beneath the hotel lights, but an aging man who had survived loss by becoming unreachable. Grief recognized grief. It did not erase what Arthur had done, but it opened a door. My wife died in a car accident, Malcolm said. Arthur raised his eyes. I was the paramedic called to the scene. Arthur's face tightened. I tried to save her. I can't imagine. You shouldn't try. Some pain doesn't need imagination. It needs respect. Arthur nodded. Afterward, I stopped being a father before I stopped being employed. My son left. I don't know where he is now. Have you looked? For years. His name? Isaiah Reed. Arthur did not reach for his phone. He understood that doing so would turn the confession into another opportunity to display power. Instead, he asked, What was your wife's name? Denise. What was she like? Malcolm stared toward the snow. She sang while paying bills. Badly. She put hot sauce on food before tasting it. She believed every room needed flowers, even if they came from weeds beside the highway. Arthur smiled. She sounds extraordinary. She was ordinary. Malcolm's eyes filled. That was the extraordinary part. Arthur looked away to give him privacy. The next morning, Harrison Cole entered Arthur's office carrying a resignation letter and a threat. If you cancel the East Side development, the board will challenge your leadership. Arthur stood by the window overlooking the city. I'm not canceling it. We're paid to hide. Harrison's face reddened. We followed every law. Arthur stepped closer. Legality is the floor, not the ceiling. You're willing to damage the company over sentiment? No. I'm willing to damage an illusion. What illusion? That wealth protects a man from moral failure. Harrison left without taking the resignation letter. Within hours, confidential details of Arthur's plan reached the press. Headlines accused him of instability. Vail Global shares fell 6%. Board members demanded an emergency vote. Arthur's advisors urged him to release photographs of Malcolm and Sophie, presenting the redevelopment as an inspiring response to a rescue. Arthur refused. His life is not a campaign. The board vote was scheduled for Friday. On Thursday evening, Malcolm left the hospital against medical advice. Elena found the empty bed and a folded note. Thank you for seeing me before knowing who I was. He returned to St. Matthew's. The shelter residents applauded when he entered, but Malcolm lowered his head, embarrassed by the attention. Darius ran to him and wrapped both arms around his body. You look terrible, the boy said. You've improved too. Sarah told Malcolm about Arthur's redevelopment plan. Malcolm listened without smiling. Do you trust him? She asked. No, do you believe him? Maybe. That's not the same thing. No, Sarah poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. The board may remove him tomorrow. Malcolm looked toward the crowded shelter. Then he'll learn what doing the right thing costs. The next morning, protesters gathered outside Vail Global headquarters. Some supported the redevelopment. Others were construction workers afraid of losing jobs. News vans lined the street. Inside the top-floor boardroom, 12 directors prepared to vote on Arthur's removal as chief executive. Arthur sat at the head of the table. He looked calm. He was not. For 40 years, the company had been his identity. Losing control felt like losing a limb. Yet beneath the fear was something unfamiliar. Freedom. He had spent his life believing power meant never being forced to surrender. Now he wondered whether real power was choosing what to surrender before it destroyed the person holding it. The board chairman began the meeting. Before the vote, the doors opened. Malcolm entered. He wore clean clothes borrowed from Reverend Sarah, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a navy coat slightly too large in the shoulders. His beard had been trimmed. He carried no folder and had no prepared speech. Security moved toward him. Arthur stood. Let him in. Malcolm walked to the far end of the table. Several directors looked irritated. One whispered, "Is this necessary?" Malcolm heard him. "No," he said. "Most truth isn't necessary to people who profit from avoiding it." The room fell silent. Arthur watched him. Malcolm placed both hands on the back of an empty chair. "I did not come to save Mr. Vale's job." Arthur almost smiled. "I came because many of you are about to make a decision using words like value, risk, duty, and responsibility. Those are good words. But good words can carry bad choices when nobody asks who pays the price." A director interrupted. "This is a private corporate meeting." Malcolm looked at him. "Your decisions stop being private when they decide where other people are allowed to sleep." No one interrupted again. Malcolm continued. "Mr. Vale treated me like a problem before he knew my name. His guard treated me like a criminal. His hospital nearly treated me like an empty bed because I had no insurance. His company planned to destroy a shelter because poor people looked like obstacles on a map." Arthur lowered his eyes. Malcolm's voice remained steady. "I am not here to tell you he is a good man." Several directors shifted. "I am here to tell you I watched him discover he had been wrong." Most people think that moment is redemption. It isn't. Real redemption is what comes next, when telling the truth costs more than the lie. He looked at Arthur. "He may lose this company today. The people at St. Matthew's have lost homes, families, jobs, health, and years. Yet they still share blankets. They still save seats at dinner. They still search for one another when someone disappears." Malcolm turned toward the board. "You call that weakness because it doesn't appear on a balance sheet. You are wrong. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength without an audience. It is power that does not need someone beneath it." Arthur's eyes burned. Malcolm stepped away from the chair. "Vote however you choose. But do not say the cheaper decision is the responsible one. Say what it really is." He walked toward the door. The chairman called after him. "Mr. Reed, what would you have us do?" Malcolm stopped. "See the people who pay for your comfort." Then he left. The board voted. 6 directors supported Arthur. 6 voted against him. The deciding vote belonged to Margaret Vale, Arthur's daughter and Sophie's mother. She had attended by video from London. Arthur looked at her face on the screen. For years, their relationship had been formal, careful, and distant. She blamed him for using work to escape the family after her brother's death. He blamed her for leaving. Neither had said the words aloud. Margaret looked at the board. "My father has spent much of his life confusing control with strength." Arthur flinched. "He has hurt people. He has hurt this family. And until this week, he rarely admitted error unless the admission improved his position." The directors waited. Margaret's voice softened. "But I will not punish him for finally changing simply because change arrived late." She voted to keep him. The redevelopment passed. Harrison Cole resigned that afternoon. An internal investigation later revealed that his team had falsified relocation reports and used private security to intimidate tenants into leaving early. Criminal charges followed. Arthur could have quietly settled the matter. Instead, he released the records publicly. Vale Global's share price fell again. Then, slowly, it recovered. Construction began 8 months later. The old shelter remained open until the new building was complete. Arthur visited often, usually without cameras. At first, the residents distrusted him. Some refused to speak to him. One woman threw a cup of water at his shoes. He did not stop coming. He served meals badly. He stacked chairs. He listened to complaints without defending himself. He learned Darius wanted to become an emergency medical technician. He learned Miss Clara hated peas. He learned Reverend Sarah could defeat anyone at chess. He learned that people did not become visible because a wealthy man finally noticed them. They had always been visible. He had simply trained himself not to look. Malcolm recovered slowly. Arthur offered him an apartment in the new development. Malcolm refused until the same housing process was made available to others with similar needs. Arthur changed the policy. Only then did Malcolm accept. The apartment was small. It had one bedroom, a kitchen window, and enough morning light for flowers. On his first night there, Malcolm placed a jar of weeds from the roadside on the table. For Denise, Elena helped him renew his emergency medical certification through a community health program. Malcolm did not return to ambulance work. His knee and lungs could no longer handle the strain. Instead, he became a first aid instructor at the new job training center. Darius joined his first class. "You're holding the bandage wrong," Malcolm told him. "It's a bandage, and a piano is wood and wire until someone learns what to do with it. You make everything sound old." "I am old. You're 58. Ancient." Darius smiled and adjusted the bandage. 16 months after the night at the hotel, Arthur asked Malcolm to meet him at the entrance of the completed development. The new St. Matthew's Center rose 5 stories above the street. Its brick exterior honored the old church, but wide windows filled the interior with light. The building included temporary shelter beds, permanent apartments, a clinic, classrooms, childcare rooms, and a public kitchen. A crowd had gathered for the opening. Reporters waited behind ropes. Arthur stood near a bronze plaque covered with blue cloth. "I told them not to put my name on it," Malcolm said. "They didn't." Arthur pulled the cloth away. The plaque read, "The Denise Reed Community Hall for Ordinary Lives Made Extraordinary by Love." Malcolm stopped breathing for a moment. Arthur watched him carefully. "I found the wording in something you said." Malcolm touched the engraved name. "You never knew her?" "No, then why?" "Because I know what remained after she was gone." Malcolm's hand trembled against the bronze. Arthur looked toward the crowd, where Sophie stood beside her mother. "There's something else." A man had appeared near the back of the gathering. He was tall, in his early 30s, with Malcolm's eyes and Denise's careful way of holding her hands together when afraid. Malcolm stared. The sounds around him faded. The traffic, the cameras, the crowd. Everything disappeared except the man walking forward. "Dad." Malcolm's knees weakened. "Isaiah." His son stopped several feet away. Years stood between them. Missed birthdays. Unanswered letters. Anger hardened into silence. Silence hardened into absence. Malcolm opened his mouth, but no words came. Isaiah's eyes filled. "I saw the boardroom video." Malcolm looked briefly at Arthur. Arthur stepped back. Isaiah continued, "I recognized your voice before I recognized your face. I looked for you. I know. I wrote. I know. I'm sorry." Isaiah lowered his head. "I was angry. You had the right. I wanted you to choose me instead of your grief." Malcolm's face broke. "I wanted that too." Isaiah crossed the distance between them. They embraced. Malcolm held his son with both arms, pressing his face against Isaiah's shoulder as years of grief left his body in raw, shaking breaths. Arthur turned away. He tried to remain composed. Then Sophie slipped her hand into his. Arthur looked at Malcolm and Isaiah holding each other beneath Denise's name. Tears filled his eyes. He did not hide them. For most of his life, Arthur had believed tears revealed a loss of control. Now he understood they could reveal the return of something control had buried. Humanity. Later, after the speeches ended and the cameras left, Malcolm stood alone inside the new community hall. Evening light poured through the tall windows. Rows of empty chairs cast long shadows across the floor. In the kitchen, volunteers washed the final dishes. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed. Pipes hummed softly inside the walls. Arthur entered carrying 2 paper bags. "I brought dinner," he said. Malcolm looked inside one. "Turkey sandwiches, apples, crackers, and chocolate," Arthur added. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Inflation?" Arthur smiled. They sat on the front steps as the sun lowered between the buildings. People passed through the new center's doors. A mother carrying a sleeping child, an elderly veteran leaning on a cane, Darius wearing his MT trainee jacket, Miss Clara complaining loudly about the peas served at lunch. Arthur opened his sandwich. Malcolm divided his in half. "You know you have your own," Arthur said. "I know." Malcolm handed half to a man sitting alone near the bottom of the steps. The man looked surprised, then grateful. Arthur watched without speaking. Months earlier, he might have tried to turn the gesture into a program, a donation, a headline. Now he simply opened the packet of crackers and placed it between them. Sophie arrived with Isaiah and sat beside her grandfather. She took the chocolate bar from the bag. broke it into 4 uneven pieces, and passed them around. The smallest piece was hers. Malcolm noticed. He said nothing. Across the street, the glass towers of the city reflected the fading gold of evening. Their hard edges softened in the light. Arthur looked at the people moving through the doors of St. Matthew's. For the first time, he did not see a project bearing his decision. He saw names, stories, losses, second chances. He looked at Malcolm. "Do you forgive me?" Malcolm chewed slowly before answering. "I forgave you a long time ago." Arthur's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because forgiveness wasn't supposed to stop your work." Arthur nodded. The answer hurt. It also set him free. The sun slipped lower. No one made a speech. No cameras flashed. Malcolm rested his hands on his knees. Isaiah sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Sophie leaned against Arthur's arm while chewing chocolate. Darius helped an elderly man through the entrance. A cool wind moved along the street. Above the doors, the lights of the new center flickered on one by one. Malcolm looked through the wide windows and imagined Denise standing inside, placing wildflowers in every room. His breathing slowed. Arthur sat beside him in silence. 2 men who had lost nearly everything in different ways. 2 men who had once mistaken pain for permission to disappear from the world. Between them lay an empty paper bag, folded carefully for whatever use might come next. And as darkness settled over the city, the doors remained open.